Hello and welcome to PS on Air, which is where columnists of Project Syndicate engage with the newspapers that publish their articles. My name is John Andrews. I'm a contributor to Project Syndicate myself, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Leonard, who is the Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And from the press, we have Sławomir Siakowski, who is the editor of the Warsaw-based Krytyka Polityczna, or Political Critique in English. The Trump presidency, we talk a lot about Trump, but maybe we should also be talking about the Vladimir Putin presidency, because the two things seem to be going together. You've had all the stuff about compromat and the hacking of the U.S. election. How do you view the relationship between Russia and the US?
I think the next phase now, as we get over the debates about fake news and hacking and things like that, will be about geopolitics and raw geopolitics. And it does look like Donald Trump is on the verge of doing a really audacious political move, which is what Nixon and Kissinger did in reverse, and trying to build an alliance between Washington and Moscow against Beijing. And the repercussions of that are going to be enormous, particularly for Europeans who find themselves on the front line.
Well, Sławomir, Poland is more or less on the front line. Do you agree with what Mark says? Is that the analysis that you have as well?
Well, for sure, we can't be happy and satisfied having Trump in America, having Brexit in Great Britain, having Le Pen or François Fillon. Both are pro-Russian, okay? And then, like, you can see that in the following elections, probably we'll get more of pro-Russian leaders, okay? But my question to you both would be, what can be really the outcome of this collaboration, of this kind of pop Minturn that emerged in the West, like people, like leaders that are really pro-Russian, cooperate, take money from Kremlin, like support Putin, like what can be the real outcome of it in the West? Because we know it, but we don't have any like real projection, like good scenario, bad scenario, mid scenario.
It's interesting because on the one hand, the common ground seems to be the level of values. There is a sort of universal pushback against the sort of liberal internationalism, cosmopolitanism, sexual politics of the noughties and of the last few years. But that is not enough to build a geopolitical alliance around. It's not like communism versus capitalism during the Cold War.
If you're right, if your first part of your answer is right, then we have kind of like two political philosophies or two sets of values. But I'm not sure if like populists are really so initiative. I think they are reactive.
I think it's true. It is reactive, but it's also. I don't think necessarily an adequate basis for international relations, not least because all of our societies are divided societies. So
you think that they are only useful idiots of Putin?
I think that's the base on which this is forged. Then you can see some areas where you could actually have a real alliance, like what's happening in the Middle East. There does seem to be a big shift in American foreign policy. Donald Trump has said that he's no longer interested in supporting the opposition in Syria. He thinks that they're just terrorists, that it should be about fighting ISIL, and that you could do a deal with Russia to deal with that. And I think that is something which is possible to imagine. The question is whether you can build out from that. And some of the things that Donald Trump said during the campaign were that he would recognise the annexation of Crimea,
exactly.
That he would remove sanctions.
Let's go into details.
Yeah.
What about sanctions?
Well, that's the biggest question, because I think the Europeans are enormously divided on sanctions.
But will they still be if you will get François Fillon? If you will,
I think that so far the big geopolitical miracle of the last 2 years has been that these tough sanctions were agreed and that they then
2 years
were
ago
robust.
Appeared not to be really tough, but like more like symbolic. But now we see that they are tough.
I think they looked pretty tough at the time. I mean, it was pretty, before MH17, the Malaysian airliner was downed, it was unthinkable that you'd have sectoral sanctions that would do big damage to European economies.
You think Trump will withdraw?
I think if Trump withdraws the sanctions, then you have all of these member states which have felt trapped in a sanctions regime which they never really believed in, countries like Italy, Hungary, Greece, Cyprus, Austria, Slovakia, Bulgaria, that are kind of ambivalent about it. And then if you get François Fillon or Marine Le Pen as the president of France, one of the countries who signed the Budapest Memorandum, who are in the Normandy format, also withdrawing from the sanctions, then they become unsustainable.
What does it mean for Ukraine?
I think we have a pretty good idea that Donald Trump is not going to. I think Ukrainians are pretty sober about how much the US was supporting them anyway. It was very clear that the Budapest Memorandum ended up not meaning a huge amount.
If you take the Trump view of Moscow and of Putin as an individual, I mean, Trump has been pretty vocal, and yet his own team seem to have misgivings about this. I mean, Tillerson, for example, was not nearly as outspokenly pro-Putin in his confirmation hearings as he had been when he was given his order of friendship. Mattis, the same, the defense secretary. I mean, is the Trump team united on this?
Nobody knows what Donald Trump is actually going to do as president. Over the last few years, he's been on both sides of many different political issues. When his prospective cabinet nominees have been trying to get through their confirmation hearings, the tried and tested rule is to say as little as possible and to be as vague as possible in these circumstances anyway. So I'm not sure we can extrapolate enormously from that. But it does seem to be something that Trump cares about a lot personally. He does seem to think this is something where he has a kind of different vision of America's role. And I suspect that...
I mean, we had the famous reset at the beginning of the Obama period. And in a sense, we're getting a reset again, aren't we?
I think it's going to be a reset on steroids, but it could go the same way as the Obama reset, in that expectations have been set quite high on both sides, and it will be interesting to see if Donald Trump satisfies the expectations that Vladimir Putin has of his coming in, and also it's not entirely clear from Trump's perspective what he wants from Russia.
This is one thing, but another thing that, in this personalized politics that we have in the world today, maybe we can expect some kind of conflict of ambitions between Putin and Trump. Both are like macho men.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Obama was not a macho man.
We saw that. I mean, the other complicated relationship between alpha males is between Erdogan and Putin. And there we've seen a lot of ups and downs. There's both kind of great steps forward.
Who's smarter? Who's a better player?
Between Putin and Donald Trump?
That's an easy answer.
Well, I think, Putin has obviously got a lot more experience than Donald Trump does. He's done a fantastic job of playing a very bad hand in terms of power play on the international
stage. Trump is a child, knowing nothing about himself. He doesn't know what he's gonna do. Not only he's contradictory in everything and being not aware of this fact.
But I don't think that's a bug in the system. I think that is the system with Donald Trump. But he also sees unpredictability as as a kind of tool of power, in the same way that Putin does, actually. So
the same way that Kim Jong-un does.
Yeah,
actually, I mean, it's
maybe they will balance each other, and we will have this status quo will survive.
What do you think of the Obama legacy? What is it?
We'll see whether he has any legacy at all, because a lot of the things that he did are going to be overturned by Donald Trump and by the Congress now that it's in the Republicans' hands. But I think domestically, there are various things, but Obamacare is the kind of signature
project. I mean, domestically, he did actually, he inherited an economy in deep doo-doo, and now it's not. I mean, unemployment was just 4.7% of the workforce.
So I think the domestic legacy is a mix of having saved the country from the worst depression.
And 2 wars in the Middle East. In
I think that's the foreign policy legacy is about a recalibration of American power. So withdrawing from Iraq and Afghanistan, pioneering a new kind of foreign policy that relied on drones, on sanctions, on other forms of influence that didn't involve putting American troops on the ground, and by and large a kind of an attempt to withdraw to offshore balancing in different parts of the world. And as a result, the US...
Well, plus also negotiating, getting a consensus. You look at the Iran deal, for example, which I think has been a great success.
Absolutely.
Whether Trump really does try to sabotage it remains to be seen.
I think you have the Iran deal, and then you have the
Cuba.
Climate and
Paris.
Cuba.
Paris, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of those things are going to come under a lot of pressure. The Iran nuclear deal is looking very vulnerable because Congress is, they put 80 bills through the last session of Congress to try and introduce sanctions on non-nuclear issues, on ballistic missiles, on regional things, on human rights.
On the other hand, Boeing is now selling a lot of aeroplanes to Iran. So is Airbus, which has a lot of suppliers in the States. Trump has talked about draining the swamp.
Yeah.
But the political reality is that companies like Boeing and Airbus and all the other aerospace and defense manufacturers in the States have huge lobbying power with campaign finance for
as long
the
as
House
they
of
are
Representatives.
produced in America, of course. But the thing is that maybe a part of this legacy that we're not aware of it, because like Obama is like civic platform in Poland. For last 8 years, they were more administrating the country than really like reforming it, doing like Polish modernization went like on a side of what happened, like in politics, really. But the biggest achievement is that they stopped Kaczynski, because Kaczynski could appear much earlier, doing the same things as he does now. Maybe Obama legacy is like stopping politicians like Bush and like blocking politicians like Trump or some other candidates of Republicans that were also.
So you mean he's
crazy
been a sort of a delaying mechanism in the rise of populism,
like sanitary cordon, and like Merkel also plays the same role. Okay, so maybe they postpone this era of populism, and every day with Kaczynski proves that Tusk, with his minimalist program, was maybe the good politician. The same way we can think about Obama.
I think Obama is also, in many ways, the father of Trump. I mean, I think that what we're seeing...
I'm sure he wouldn't like that particular description, but
it's a good
you
point.
could be right.
Why do you think it is?
Well, I think that, Trump is a product of identity politics, and what Obama did was ran a campaign which was centered around mobilizing what democratic strategists called the emerging democratic majority, but it was essentially looking at all the groups who felt disenfranchised and creating a rainbow coalition out of gay people, out of women, out of African Americans, out of Latinos, out of a lot of the groups who felt that the world had been organized against them over the years, and he knitted them together into this powerful political force.
And he did it twice.
He did it twice, and he could probably...
And he could probably have done it a third time.
In fact, he claims that he would have done it a third time. But as a result of that, if all those groups mobilize themselves, it's not that surprising that you get a counter-mobilization of the white working class who thought of themselves as a majority but feared that they were going to become a minority.
Especially if you have a candidate like Hillary Clinton.
But that was the interesting thing.
So in a way, she's more a mother of Trump than Obama is a father of.
I think
that's a good point.
As an African American, kind of was like embodied the movement, so he didn't need to talk about it. And what was interesting about his original election campaign in 2008, it was all about being a kind of post, it was about bringing the country together. He didn't run as a black man. Whereas Hillary Clinton had none of that, and it was entirely about identity politics.
Don't you think, just one question,
sure.
Don't you think that he was more credible than she? Like if when she entered the scene and saying like, I'm going to change America, I'm going to do this, this, this. Who would believe it after 30 years of her policies in Washington? When he entered the scene, said, I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to expel those guys and these guys. Well, why not to believe in what he's saying?
Yeah. Mark, I go, just a final question. If you take Presidents Obama, Clinton, and George W., how will history rate them? Give them marks out of 10, 10 being the best. Obama.
I think Obama will be probably a 7.
Okay. George W.
I think he'll be 4.
And Bill Clinton.
I think Bill Clinton will probably be 7 or 8.
Yeah, that's it.
Mark Leonard, thank you very, very much for being our guest. Thank you very much for being with us on PS On Air.